I'm Spencer Yantis, Associate Vice President for Development, and want to welcome you to our celebration of Elizabeth's life. We have a short program with some people for remembrances of Elizabeth, a very important person in our lives. I'd like to call on our Chancellor and President, Renu Khator.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome here. We are here to celebrate life of one of just a cherished friend and just a great person here. Because it was for Elizabeth, I know I was going to be here, but I need to tell you what I went through this morning so that you know what power Elizabeth has even today. I was in Dallas, and it didn't look like I was supposed to come here. And once I start from about 1 hour and 30 minutes I gave before, from downtown area, thought I'll catch my flight at 1:30 so I can be here on time. Well, the driver took me to wrong airport, Dallas, Fort Worth. And then once I realized, I said, wait a minute, I'm supposed to go from Love Field. So now I come back to Love Field. I'm already getting so late. And once I walk in there and says flight canceled for 1:30, then I go to the ticket counter, and I knew for sure now it's the next flight. They tell the next flight is delayed, the following flight is delayed. You don't even know when it's going to be scheduled. And then they said, you want to try the 1 o'clock flight? And I say, you think I can make that? It's only 10 minutes left. They say, well, try it. I say, okay, I can run. So now I get into the security, and you see this jacket with all these steel things, I have never had that long a security done. And I did not think I'll make it, but it was for Elizabeth. It's her magic, her power. There I was. I reached the gate. I was the last person to get on the flight, and here I came here earlier than usual. Earlier. Now, I really want to welcome Elizabeth's family, beautiful family here, and friends, and everybody who knew Elizabeth, because she has really made us all very rich. I want to tell you, take you back to January 15th, 2008. Why that day is so important for me, because that was my first day on this campus. I started my job here. It's my first day. And on that very first day, who comes to visit me in my office? Elizabeth. She came there, I'm brand new. She comes and gives me a hug. And I can tell you, I can still feel that hug, because it made me feel, this is home, you are home, everything will be all right. Because you can imagine, after leaving Florida after 25 years, and the university where I knew absolutely where every single bone was buried, to be coming here not knowing anything, it can be intimidating. But she made it feel like it's just family. She embraced me, and I have just not forgotten that. We developed such a strong bond and friendship. She has been an inspiration to me. Her smile, her eyes, everything just speak of her story, but at the same time, they speak of our future. She has been, as I learned more about her, I knew that she has been a fighter. Even she went to Washington, D.C. in the 70s, and where she testified before Congress for IRAs, and because she was the only person who could tell everything in very plain language. Everybody else would talk about other kinds of things, and she can just put everything down into simple words, and that's what she did many times for me here as well. She truly has been just a gem of an alum. I just can't imagine anybody supporting with her time and wealth in a way that Elizabeth has done for us. And every single time, the care and compassion just came out of everything she said. I met her so many times right here in this room, and every single time her smile was even brighter than the last time, because she believed. She believed in this word, she believed in love, she believed in this university, and she knew that she was part of something very special. So I know as a friend we will miss her loyalty, her elegance, her graciousness. I know as a donor we'll miss her inspiration. She's not just a loss for this university, she is a loss for the city. She is a loss for this state. She's one of those people you just cannot let go. And I know she stays with me. There are so many facilities, this including named after her. And, that's definitely one way to leave your legacy. But another way to leave your legacy is in people's hearts. And she is leaving such a legacy in all of our hearts. We are rich people today. We are a rich institutions today. Thanks to Elizabeth. And I get emotional thinking about her, talking about her, because she has been just such a special friend and supporter. So today we celebrate, and I'm just honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is John Phillips, and I have been a dear friend for Elizabeth well over 35 years. Elizabeth Rockwell was quite a lady. You don't really understand that until you've been with her as long as I had. We were dear friends and companions. I'm going today to talk to you about 3 families that Elizabeth had. A lot of y'all did not know this. She had a biological family, she had a business family, and then she had a university family. The university is kind enough to host this out here today so that we can talk about all 3 of them. Now, let's talk first about her biological family. Elizabeth often referred to herself as being an only child with two brother and sister. Now, you stop and think about that. Yet, she did have 2 biological brother, who I never met. He passed away before I got to meet him, and a biological sister by the name of Pat. And Pat is here today to talk to you for a few minutes about her sister and her family growing up. Pat?
Elizabeth was my sister. I was Nazelle. I am Nazelle Werlein. But when I was 5 months old, my sister wanted a Patsy doll for Christmas. And it was Patsy, 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 Patsy. And so one day the nurse came in and she put me on her lap and she said, "Here's your Patsy." Well, with a mother named Nazelle and a little one named Nazelle, it's going to be Big Nazelle and Little Nazelle. So somehow my mother let Patsy fit. And nobody knows me as Nazelle. So I am Patsy, I am Pat, I am Patty, and Patricia. But we were very different. And I sent her a card 15 years ago for a birthday. And she called me immediately and said, "Where did you find that card?" And I told her, "In a car wash." So it starts out and it says the story of 2 very different sisters. Now, since I was the other one, it says, one is here, one lives there. One is a little taller than the other. 2 different colors of hair. Different outlooks on life, 2 very different views from their windows. Well, as it turned out, as we were growing up, she taught me to sew. She taught me the handwork that she did, which was very beautiful. And then, about that time, she went into getting busy in the business world. I think she started when she was 7 in my grandfather's office. But this was much later on. But then she taught me a few things. She was, of course, 9 years older than I was, so, we didn't do a whole lot together. But we did those things. And it turned out that she went off and came back home. I had 3 children and went that direction with children. And she went into the business world and the university world. And so all 3 of us, her sister, her brother, and herself all went to the University of Houston. So that's where I get in. But she was very successful in business. She was very successful out here. She loved the alumni. And I did come to an alumni dinner for her when they had, what was it? It was some kind of dinner that we went to. And, but that was where I fit in, was every once in a while I'd get to go to something. But then it says, and then at the end of the thing it says, they share an incredible, precious gift of being sisters, and when you think of some of the best things this world has to offer, the blessing like that is really what it's all about. And she just couldn't wait to call me about this card. She said it fits so good. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Now I'd like to speak with you about her business family. I had occasion to meet Elizabeth back in the early 70s when I was a young up-and-coming rookie with E.F. Hutton and Company. Elizabeth was a vice president over at Heights Savings and Loan, running the IRA department. At the time, I had a partner by the name of Charles Fay. And Charles and I were on a trip together in Amsterdam at Copenhagen, where Paul Harvey was speaking. A lot of you remember Paul Harvey. And after that meeting, we went to a restaurant called Five Flies. It was in the basement of this building. And we each had our wives, and we were sitting there, and Charles was sitting across from me, and he said, you know, Elizabeth, we need to get Elizabeth over with us. By that time, Charles and I had moved to Oppenheimer and set our roots there as a partnership. So we began to court Elizabeth because she had a wealth of knowledge. She had maturity. She was 61. And she had a great following of IRA money. We went and had dinner on several occasions, and I remember one time she met with the chairman of our company. And at the time, Elizabeth was making $30,000 a year. Now back then, I guess that was quite a bit of money. But she wanted a contract from Oppenheimer. Basically, she wanted a guarantee. He looked at her and he said, the kind of money you'll make over here, you don't need any contract. The first 90 days, she made over $100,000. So, therefore, she went on to great wealth. You know, I last saw Elizabeth a week ago Monday with Nancy. She was sitting in her chair smiling. She had on her pretty clothes. And while she didn't say much, she nodded her head and she smiled at us. I took my little dog over there with her and she sat on her lap and she liked that. And then I left Thursday to go to Fiji. And while I was in the air that night, Elizabeth passed. I got a urgent telegram the next morning, and I said, you know, we thought that when I saw her that Monday, we thought that she would probably live another 2 to 5 years. But with her going as she did, it was a blessing not only to her, but to her body. When I got home, I got this paper. And you know, most people make the obituaries. Elizabeth made the city and state. And then I got to reading about it and said a great friend of the University of Houston, which we all know. And then it talked about philanthropists. Now, you know, I'm just a country boy. I thought philanthropist with billions and billions and billions of dollars. And I thought, did Elizabeth not tell me something when I started handling her assets? So I went to the dictionary and I looked up the word philanthropist. And it says someone who makes donations intended to increase human well-being. That's Elizabeth Rockwell. And it said a person who loves the human race and is a very generous person. That's Elizabeth Rockwell. Another one, it says voluntary promotion of human welfare. That's Elizabeth Rockwell. And one is one who exerts herself for the well-being of her fellow man. That is Elizabeth Rockwell. You know, when she started with us back in September 15th, 1982, a dynasty began. And when she passed the other day, as one of my associates emailed me, a dynasty has ended. I'd like her Oppenheimer family to please stand up for just a moment and remain standing. This is Valerie Goatee. Valerie was Elizabeth's secretary for years and years and years. Now, at Oppenheimer, we all had a name. Valerie was Valero, and she would not be called anything other than that. The other lady is Tammy Sherman. Tammy was also one of Elizabeth's right-hand person. We called her Tamalita. They named me Old Goat. And then there was Elizabeth. A lot of you might remember this. Her name was the Duchess. Do you remember that? You know what we did? I went out to the car show one day. They were making these plastic license plates where you could put them on the cars before they became illegal. And I had one made Duchess. And when her car came into the office, into the parking garage one day, I went out there and I put it on the front license plate. And it was a long time before she found out about it. But y'all all knew it because she'd drive around the University of Houston here as a Duchess. And that stayed on her car until we sold it. When she found out that she was a Duchess, she said to me, well, why not the Queen? And I said, Elizabeth, we already have one, and she's in England. But Elizabeth was one wonderful, wonderful lady. I enjoyed my relationship with her. She was extremely generous and kind to me and my family and those around her. And I assure you, the University of Houston, she did leave you $2.98. With that now, I would like to pass to Spencer, who would like to speak about her third family, the University of Houston. Thank you.
You know, like the president and like John, this is emotional. As you have heard and will hear, Elizabeth was one fantastic woman. I met Elizabeth in July of 1998. It was my first week on the job. And we met at her and John's private client office at Oppenheimer. After pleasantries were exchanged, she asked if I was any relation to Oakley Yantis in San Antonio. I said, as a matter of fact, I am. He is my dad's double first cousin. Those of you into genealogy can appreciate that closeness. She said, okay, then we're kissing cousins. And I said, fine. So after a year, I think it was after she had checked me out, She said, I have decided we will address each other as cousin. And that's the way it was for over 12 years. This room that we're in, was Elizabeth's gift to the library campaign. Elizabeth paid attention to detail, and she said to Dana, she said, I'm going to have this room named after me, but I always want it to look presentable. I don't want you to have to worry about getting new drapes or new chairs. And so she not only gave enough money for the construction of this room, she put together an endowment to maintain it. Elizabeth took care of details. Elizabeth and I met every quarter to go out to eat because she wanted to take me to different restaurants that I might want to take somebody who was a real donor. And we would evaluate it, and she would tell me, it's too noisy in here, people can't hear. And she finally said, and you need to get hearing aids, which I now have. But at the conclusion of each of those meetings with Elizabeth, she would say, what's my next assignment? And I'd better have one for her, because if I didn't, we had wasted her time. But one day in early 2004, I said, instead of an assignment, I have a question. I said, you have done so much for the university. 3 endowed chairs for deans, the Bauer Career Center, this room, the room over at the Alumni Center, on and on. I said, you've done so much, but what would you want your most important legacy to be for the University of Houston? And she thought about that for a minute, and she said, I want people to appreciate and understand ethics and leadership. And I want this to be available for all, for students, faculty, staff, and friends of the university. And this is going to be a rather large sum, so she said, Spencer, I will take care of this in my will. And I said, okay, but let's go ahead and draft up what you would like to see in this. And so we began a path to establish the Elizabeth Rockwell Center for the Study of Ethics and Leadership at the University of Houston. And one of the first requirements was going to be that a speaker would come each year and speak to those situations. This spring we will have the 5th one, because she said, well, I want to see some of this before I'm up there above looking at you. And I want to have the joy, so we had those lectureships. But then she said, I want to provide a visiting professor, perhaps a person who had been in the business world who could come and pass on how they did leadership and ethics. And I want there to be money for a part-time administrative assistant. I don't want it to be a burden on the university. So last Friday morning when Nancy called me, I agree with John, it was a blessing, but there's a big, shallow place. So in closing, I say, thanks, cuz. Next is Charles Saunders, but he's not able to be here due to illness and some weather. And he's asked Grant Davis to come and present his remarks. Grant.
So hello, my name is Grant Davis. I'm a graduate student here at the University of Houston for the School of Theater and Dance. And Charles Saunders was in the theater department here when he was here. So he asked me to present this for him. Greetings from room 608 of Memorial Hermann Hospital from Betty Saunders and me. We are met on this auspicious occasion to find our hearts together commemorating our lifelong friendship for Dr. Elizabeth Dennis Rockwell. Was it only yesterday that Elizabeth and I stood at the exit of San Jacinto Senior High School, bidding farewell to those who would not be going with us to the new world of the University of Houston campus on St. Bernard Street? There we stood, teenagers, side by side, hand in hand, expressing gratitude to those who would remain at San Jacinto High School. There we stood, hand in hand, facing a hostile world. Who among us was to foresee? One, a poor boy from the other side of town, holding hands with a beautiful redhead, touched by fortune to become a leader in education and culture to face that world. Yet she and I set our feet on opening day on the new campus resolutely. One who could take the extended hand of the university when the university needed an enhanced library or a new business school. Each time the university asked Elizabeth, she took it and led it to unparalleled successes, and then ultimately to Tier 1. Elizabeth would like to leave each of us with the afterglow of a life well lived through her, and especially under the life care of Nancy Clark. Sincerely, Charles Saunders.
Good afternoon. As a proud UH alumna, I am honored to speak on behalf of my friend Elizabeth and her considerable imprint on this university. Much has been made of Elizabeth's gifts to the academic side of the university, and these, of course, are quite significant. My comments will focus on the non-academic side, specifically the UH Alumni Association. Picture, if you can, 30 years ago, many of you can do that, in a cramped space in a shared building about where new dorms are today on the Wheeler side of the campus. Frank Holmes, the alumni director at that time, was struggling to develop a viable alumni organization, which at that time consisted of very few members. There was no beautiful alumni building. There was no life member program. There were very few alumni services, and there was little support from the university, financially or otherwise. Enter Elizabeth Rockwell. Things were about to change. She and I met as AO board members. It was called the Alumni Organization at that time. Shortly, we became fast friends and colleagues. I was privileged to have a front row seat as she put her considerable energy and enthusiasm into moving that fledgling organization into what it is today. As I reflect back, I should not have been so surprised. After all, this was Elizabeth's modus operandi. Over the years, she became known for her generosity to the university in various ways, but she never forgot the importance of the alumni and its role in determining the future of the university. One only needs to look at the vibrancy of the alumni organization today to see the results of her enormous support. Looking closely, you will see her name on one of the halls in our beautiful alumni athletics building. Just one more of the many imprints her generosity created. And no one deserved Distinguished Alumni designation more than Elizabeth, and we were proud sisters in that recognition. Though she came from the business school, her interests were wide-ranging, and we served on several boards and committees on the campus, and our friendship deepened. So it was with great sadness when her health became problematic. I believe the last time I saw Elizabeth was at a concert at the Moore School of Music. She came with a group from her retirement home. And though she was beginning to fail, on that occasion, she was full of optimism and enthusiasm, which is the way I will remember her. On that occasion, we hugged, talked about the concert, and she assured me she was doing fine, recovering from her broken hip. Then she said, "Shirley, do you remember those early days together on the AO board?" And then she continued with so much pride, "This place has come a long way since then." I, of course, agreed with that. I should have added the postscript, "Elizabeth, you have played a significant role in this journey." Elizabeth had her little quirks, you know. She's the only person I ever knew who sent out a letter at Thanksgiving recounting all that happened to her during the year, of course focusing on her UH involvements. She was a one-woman PR firm for UH. Usually we get these "let me tell you about myself" letters at Christmas, you know. But then Elizabeth was thankful for a lot. She had accomplished a lot, and she felt Thanksgiving was the right time to share it all. Besides, at Thanksgiving, her letter would not get lost in a snowfall of Christmas cards. She always wanted to have an impact. Well done, Elizabeth. You have enriched our lives. You have generously given back to your beloved university. You have left an enduring legacy. Bon voyage, good friend.
My name is Jim Patterson, and I'm a friend of Elizabeth's through the church. And before I start this, the one thing struck me as I thought back on Elizabeth's life, and that is that she didn't spend her money on consumptive things. She wasn't out buying things and living high off the hog. She decided to devote her investment here to help others. Elizabeth was raised in a Christian Science family, and her mother was a devout Christian Scientist. She loved God and she loved her fellow man, and the University of Houston gave her that community in which to express it. The following readings will give you a sample of the positive message that Christian Science brought to her life. King James Version of the Bible, Joel. I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh. 1 John. Beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God, and everyone that loveth is born of God, and knoweth God. He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love. John. It is the Spirit that quickeneth, the flesh profiteth nothing. The words that I speak unto you, they are spirit, and they are life. Romans. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation, or distress, or persecution, or famine, or nakedness, or peril, or sword? Nay, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him that loved us. For I am persuaded that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth, nor any other creature shall be able to separate us from the love of God, which is in Christ Jesus our Lord. 1 Corinthians. As it is written, eye hath not seen nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love him. And from Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures by Mary Baker Eddy. Jesus beheld in science the perfect man who appeared to him where sinning mortal man appears to mortals. In this perfect man the Savior saw God's own likeness, and this correct view of man healed the sick. Thus Jesus taught that the kingdom of God is intact, universal, and that man is pure and holy. Man is not a material habitation for soul. He is himself spiritual. Soul, being spirit, is seen in nothing imperfect nor material. Thanks.
Thank you all for taking the time to come here today to celebrate the wonderful life of Elizabeth Dennis Rockwell. As shared by many, Elizabeth knew what she wanted and worked hard to put her thoughts into actions and her actions into the legacies that we have here on campus today that will touch our grandchildren's grandchildren. Elizabeth prearranged everything she could. Her lifelong wish was for no funeral and no memorial service. We talked about this specifically. I often explained to her that if she wanted to haunt me, she could, but I knew her friends would gather for a celebration of her life. It took a while, but she finally agreed a celebration like this was okay. So here goes. I have learned that you find out a lot about a person when you travel with them or when you help them move. John can share many stories about traveling, trips in his plane where he was flying, like the time that they were guided for takeoff by everybody they had just met with by pulling their cars up and shining their headlights so that they could leave, or the time that they had an evening meal of barbecue and onions, and then Elizabeth said it was a bit of a turbulent flight home. Elizabeth and I took several unusual trips together, and we enjoyed the rides there and back again, like the time she was speaking for a group of high school seniors at a Rotary conference in Waller, or the time we were in Galveston because she was getting an award from the Galveston Historical Society through the Galveston City Council. Elizabeth always liked the role of navigator, getting us to the event and keeping the driver, me, entertained with stories. But let me concentrate on the area of moving. When a person moves, there is often an element of vulnerability that surfaces because it's often a time of change and unrest. I accompanied Elizabeth in 4 major moves of her life. The first was the beginning of the year of the new century, around 2001. She said it was her partial retirement. John knew that it was time to say adios to CIBC Oppenheimer, and there was nothing partial about it. We had just gone through kind of a difficult time. We were walking into this building, and she tripped right over here in front, and she broke a wrist. So she was kind of battling that, and then we were trying to shut down her office at 1600 Smith. The office staff thought that it could be packed easily in a day and moved. Elizabeth and I worked on it for over a week. I knew that this was a chapter of her life that was so dear and so precious, and she wasn't going to close the book quickly. So whenever she wasn't looking, I would pack a bunch of stuff and put them in the box, but she was looking most of the time. I think we read every paper in every file. She told me every story about every item in her desk, on the walls, and in the adjoining rooms. For instance, in the conference room, it was lined up with champagne bottles. These were all from appreciative clients that Elizabeth and John had retired. I don't think any of that champagne was any good because it all sat in windows along the walls. Elizabeth knew these people as friends, and she could tell the story of each one. She would tell me the story about the teacher with limited funds or the oil executive with a large portfolio. She told me about one client who loved being retired, and he would come to her and say, she ought to try it. And then he would quickly recant and say, nope, you need to keep working because you're keeping me nicely retired. Next came the move from her Yoakum residence of half a century to a nearby retirement community. This move took longer than the office move. It took over 6 months. It seemed everywhere she turned, she saw something that had a great story behind it. Dishes reminded her of those many dinner parties. Elizabeth loved to entertain. She was well known for entertaining, for her very tart homemade orange marmalade. She shared the secret being lemons along with the oranges. Her highly prized biscuits. She told me about the yeast culture that she grew named Herman, and that she always kept it growing enough so she could share it with others. It was mentioned before, Elizabeth loved sewing, crocheting ribbon dresses, needlepoint, creating special outfits for occasions. She talked about the twinkling lights she would sew into a skirt or a hat for a holiday party. She often mentioned Myrtle. Myrtle was a Singer sewing company exact replica body form so she could fit her dresses. They had to heat some sheets and put it on her body and take them off. She said Myrtle even had the dimple on the shoulder that Elizabeth had. From early childhood, Elizabeth did not need a lot of sleep. We had an agreement that even though I knew she was up, she would not call me after midnight or before 6 a.m. But she filled all of those hours with the activities that she loved, including reading for business, but never for pleasure. She explained that after a grade school teacher criticized her reading, she never found fun in reading. One night at the terrace, Elizabeth slipped, it was mentioned, and she fractured her hip. Even at St. Luke's Hospital, sitting in the emergency room for hours upon hours, she enjoyed questioning everybody about everything and learning new things. After they fixed her hip, she learned, and she quickly told everybody, you don't put pins in a hip. You put 3-inch titanium screws. That's how your hip is fixed. So this next move was from the terrace to the Hampton at Post Oak. This brought more stories about pivotal life moments. She reminisced about her grandfather's blowout for her 7th birthday party. It was a circus-themed party at River Oaks Country Club. All the children wore costumes from animals to clowns. Elizabeth wore her pink tutu from dance class. Elizabeth and Jim Elkins led the parade around the grounds, and that includes through the beautiful grass of the golf course. She thinks that was the last birthday party they left there. And then into the room with all the presents. She said she didn't remember how many kids were invited, but she said she was opening birthday packages for weeks. Her favorite birthday gift at that party was a gold thimble with her name etched on the inside. She also remembered this event was such a blowout that it was actually filmed, and the film was shown at a theater on Main at Texas before the feature movie. She remembered a story about her piano lessons from Martha D. Willis at the Warwick Hotel twice a week. The recitals were in the ladies' lounge on the lobby floor of the Warwick. Ms. Willis lived on the 4th floor. One thing you learn quickly about Elizabeth, she had a perfect mind for memory. She could tell you if somebody lived in the Warwick, if they were on the northeast corner and had windows or not. She knew all about locations. She would talk about when she finished this recital that someone would bring a basket of flowers up to the performer. And she loved getting flowers. She said she got many. And so that began her lifelong love of always having flowers around her. At the Hampton, Elizabeth loved sharing her knowledge about Houston with all the other residents. And she would actually give classes there. One Saturday, we were sitting and talking, and there were a group of Girl Scouts who were trying to earn a Girl Scout badge. They needed to interview residents. Elizabeth quickly said, no problem, she'd be happy to talk to them. So she told them about being a young child in Houston and what it was like, and then she took it one step further. She told them about being a Girl Scout at Camp Tejas. This was property given by millionaire Jim West. It was in Clear Lake. She explained how rustic it was, no flushing toilets. She told him that even the Boy Scouts camp had flushing toilets. Luckily, she said her stay was shortened when she cut her hand with her Girl Scout pocket knife and had to be picked up. And that was her word, luckily, because she said she was ready to go. Or there was the story of the time of the early entrepreneur. Elizabeth discovered a simple recipe for making paste, flour, water, and salt. So she said she found every jar in the house that was empty. She made paste and went around the neighborhood and sold it. Or the story about the time she got her dad to send off for free samples of beauty supplies. Then she got a hat box from her mom, and she went around giving facials to her mom's friends. Or the story about Christmas when her mom and dad were at the Palace Theater, and they invited the lead actor. His name was Stanley Smith, and then there was a second actor with him. Her mom invited them home for Christmas dinner. Before they ate, this second actor helped Elizabeth because she had just gotten her first big two-wheel bike. It was from Marsh's Bike Shop here in Houston, so it was green. That was the bikes from there were a special color. The second actor helped get her balanced so she could ride her two-wheeler, and she used to always love telling people his name was none other than Clark Gable. Or the stories about how the family had spent the summers, because summers in Houston back then were hot. And one time Ron Stone was during a class or a story on TV about hot Houston summers, and she would talk about how there were two places that they would go. They'd spend one summer at the Palms and then the other summer in California. The Palms was a 30-acre property between LaPorte and Seabrook that her grandfather owned, and that's where she kept Daisy Dimple, her Shetland pony. When her grandfather sold the Palms, they ended up moving Daisy Dimple over to where their house was at Sleepy Hollow Court, which meant that the stables would be right at San Felipe and Larchmont. The other summers, they went over to California, and she loved those too because they would go on the train. And she remembered many stories stopping, like in New Mexico, and seeing the Indians with their blankets and all their beads, or going through the desert at nighttime, or one trip where the Blaffer girls were on the train with her, and she remembered how every one of them were dressed. Anyway, when they got to California, they had all kinds of things that they did, including her mom was good friends and classmates with movie director Vidor King. And so her mom got to go to the movie studios. They wouldn't let kids in, and that always upset Elizabeth because she thought that she could be fine on the set. The next move was from the Hampton to Lovett Place, back to Elizabeth's neighborhood of so many years. By now, Elizabeth was winding down. By now, there would be no more annual melange. Many remember that newsletter that we would send out. A typical melange would have 4 pages. It would have 2 to 3 events from every month. There were many more than 2 to 3, I promise you. But we would only pick that many, and the reason was, after 4 pages, the postage went up too much. By now, Elizabeth was happy and tired. She was comfortable and smiling. Then early on Friday morning, January 28th, Elizabeth made a move without my help. No boxes to pack, no fragile glass to wrap. Quietly, she alone packed up those things most important in her life: love, trust, peace, kindness, knowledge, and she headed on her next adventure. Elizabeth left so much for us all, and I don't mean the things that we can touch, like buildings or rooms. She left an example of a life well spent, a lifetime of teaching others and helping others be the best they could be. She also left a challenge for us to follow in her footsteps. Many of you will remember her words: Uncle Sam or a charity, pick one. Elizabeth was always a pioneer, paving new paths so it might be easier for others to follow. I'm grateful to have known Elizabeth and to have been her friend. I think of myself sometimes as those people in Fahrenheit 451 when there aren't any books and everybody reads and memorizes one book. I've got so many Elizabeth stories that I've memorized that I'm ready to share them with anybody at any time. Okay, we're at 4:25, and you know how Elizabeth was a stickler for time. So we'll let a few people who might have a memory that they want to share it with us. We've got a wireless mic. Just raise your hand, and we'll run to you. We're going to end if somebody doesn't raise their hand. In that case, then, we're going to go ahead and end. Make sure that you've done. Elizabeth was very much a stickler for details. There are 2 books that everybody needed to sign when they came today. One will go to the family, one will stay in her archives. We also have some memorabilia of Elizabeth and then some food to enjoy. Thank you for coming today.